Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rebel Brokers 2020 Property Finding Tutorial. Now, this is going to be a tool for anybody. It's going to work great for investors because we're going to take a very investor-focused approach to this in terms of just calculating whether or not it's a positive cash flow property. However, let me also suggest that some of the techniques that almost all of the techniques we're going to be using here would be super valuable for buyers who are shopping and also sellers who are trying to calculate the desirability of their property in a crowded marketplace if your marketplace is crowded. This is going to be a specific deep dive as an example into markets around the Phoenix area, but what I'm going to be showing you here are things you can use anywhere. I'm going to use tools that are available to anyone. I'm not going to use any of my magical real estate broker tools that only I have access to, and there is actually kind of a cool one. And we'll talk about at what stage you need to actually engage with a real estate agent. There will be some exceptions depending on where you're looking, and I'll try to remember to bring those up as we're going. I'm doing this from the perspective of a California real estate broker who has advised hundreds of folks on how to invest and helped people invest and buy properties and to sell investment properties. So let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to start with Phoenix. Why Phoenix? Because Phoenix has been on almost every list in terms of desirable places to purchase an investment property. So it'll give us some good numbers there. And what's really super interesting is I've already found a property. I didn't want to waste your time. I wanted this to be sort of a get into it quick, but I am going to run through real quickly the process I go through to pick the area I'm looking at or to pick the specific property I want to do research on. You as a buyer, even if you don't want to invest, you should treat the purchase of your home as an investment. The reason is, the old saying goes, you don't make your home when you sell it, you make it when you buy it. And the implication there is that you're buying under circumstances that are the best possible for you. And that doesn't just mean, a huge chunk of it does mean how much you pay, but a lot of it means the terms, conditions, but also things you can't change. The location of the home, the desirability of the layout of the home, things that are going to make it a much more desirable property down the road. And many of you may be asking, well, why would I care about that? It's a very much a seller's market in many places, but that's not always going to be true. Anyone who's lived through the downturn of 2007, 2006 knows that that can change. And while it would be great if you can sort of make it through that, I mean, we all have seen now the market recover quite a bit from that. But if you were forced, if for some other reason, if other things happened that made it necessary for you to sell your property during a time like that, you want to be the most desirable property in all the ways that you can't change. Right? You can change the paint, you can change the carpeting, you can do all kinds of wonderful things to your home. You can even change a little bit the layout inside. But in general, you can't change its location, you can't change the size of your lot, you can't change the desirability of where it is. So we're going to cover it from that perspective, and I'm going to suggest that all of you use the same criteria when you're evaluating a purchase for yourself, whether it's something you want to live in or something that you want to use as an investment. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. So where we are is Realtor.com. For those of you who watched, I did one of these, it's probably a couple of years ago now, but I think it was only available to members of the Rebel Underground. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, my name is Robert Whitelaw. I'm a real estate broker in the state of California, and I'm also the host of a podcast called Real Estate Realities with the Rebel Broker. Now, I've been doing that podcast since January of 2007. So right when things were nuts or going nuts is when the show started. Feel free to check it out. It's still going on. And there is a group of folks called the Rebel Underground, and I share sort of inside scoops with them. I reach out to those folks with additional information. And one of them was, I think, an exclusive video on how to do this. So this time around, I'm going to share it with the world, and hopefully it'll be a great tool in your toolbox when it comes to real estate. Okay, so where do I start? Now, as a general rule, when I'm looking at a new marketplace, I start with what I consider to be the bread and butter house. Now, of course, in certain areas, this is going to change a little bit. In general, in my marketplace, 2-bedroom homes are not great. They're not the most desirable. The most searched for property is a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. You can ask one quick question of a real estate agent in the area you're interested in and say, what are the most desirable? What is the most searched for combination in terms of real estate, single family residential real estate in your marketplace? to help you dial in what's right, because I can imagine there are some towns where those 2-bedroom, 1.5-bath properties right in downtown might be super desirable for whatever reason. Maybe it's a college town, maybe, who knows? Could be a lot of reasons, but you want to know those things. You don't necessarily have to know it right now. You can go with my assumption that 3 and 2s are always going to be desirable and move from there. But we're going to do that from here and move forward with this particular search. So I always start with that. And in terms of other criteria that I put in, I figure out the maximum amount of money I want to spend in terms of the investment. Now, in this case, I don't want to spend more than $300,000, right? I want to go with a community that has a low barrier to entry. And that may be crazy to some of you who may live in towns where you purchased your property for $180,000. But in general, I like to try to stay at average price for the nation or lower when I'm looking at different areas like this. And it also depends on how much money you have. If you don't have lots and lots of cash, that number may be lower for you, and that's fine too. I'm going to go with $350,000, even though $300,000 is my limit. Why? Because this current marketplace is showing that homes are not selling for list price. So I want to make sure that I'm searching in a range where I could potentially negotiate down the price if I found a property that made sense in every other way. Every other way means the math works, means that it would be positive cash flow, right? Okay, next. It can be single-family residential, or it can be single-family residential plus other things. In my case, I'm fine with single-family homes, kind of preferred right now. Multifamily homes, I don't go higher than 4plexes in terms of my searches. If it's higher than that, I just don't want to go there. There's different laws actually that apply, at least in California, and I'm sure in most other areas, once you go past a 4plex. And then condos and townhomes with some very specific limiters on that in terms of HOAs and other kinds of things. The whole other ball of wax gets introduced when you're looking at townhomes and condos in general if there's an HOA involved, and there usually is. Bedrooms, 3+, baths, 2+. I also have it set to hide pending transactions. That means a pending transaction means that the seller has already accepted an offer and it still has contingencies. So what that means is you as a buyer, when you purchase the home, you agree to do certain things, but you also stipulate that you need to do certain research before you'll purchase the home, meaning that there's a window of time when you're in contract when a buyer can back out of the transaction without any loss of their earnest money. That's the way it works here in California. Your mileage may vary in other states, but in general, that's the way it works. You make the offer contingent on you doing different inspections and approving of those inspections. And of course, it doesn't make sense for you to lose any of your money if you discover the foundation is screwed up or it's infested with termites, with tens of thousands of dollars worth of work that needs to be done, those kinds of things. Once you sign off on those contingencies, saying, basically you sign a piece of paper that says, okay, I've had my home inspection, I've had my termite inspection, I've had my roof inspection, my septic inspection, my well inspection, whatever is needed, and I'm perfectly fine with everything that is involved in the property, right? So once you sign off on those contingencies, you would lose your money if you backed out of the transaction, right? One contingency can also be your loan, which you usually sign off at some point prior. Usually it depends on where you are and what the current situation is, but I know that most banks say that it'll take 30 to 45 days to fund. Again, these are all numbers that are different in different marketplaces, but you have to get, at some point, you need to sign off even on that contingency for your sellers. Okay, sorry, kind of getting into the weeds here. Let's focus on the search. All right, so here we are looking at Phoenix. And the red dots represent properties that fit the bill. Now, now there's actually 2,062 properties, but it's only showing me 200 right now. Now, why do I suggest Realtor.com? Now, back in the olden days, for those of you who've been listening to me for a while, you know that I was suggesting Trulia.com. And the reason was because of this little button right here. Trulia used to, in this view, let you turn on a crime map so that you could get a feel for the layout of where crime is happening the most in the communities you were looking in. For whatever reason, Trulia stopped doing that about a year ago, maybe a little more, and lost their seat as the #1 suggested site for me if you want to do a search. So now Realtor.com is doing it. It's a fantastic tool, and the darker the color, the higher the crime in those areas. One thing that's also cool about Trulia, aside from Realtor.com, is where you start, but when you go and you look at rentals to compare to see what properties are renting for in the areas you're interested in, or if you want to look at the crime map for a specific property, Trulia does allow you to use this crime map in a detail view of a property. It just doesn't let you do it in this view where you're looking at all the properties that are currently for sale. The reason why you'd want to do that is they also break down the crimes that are happening. And I have crimes I don't want to deal with. Crimes that are specifically property related, I'm not interested in. If I'm dealing with a property that I'm interested in purchasing where there are high rates of car break-ins, those types of things, and it's mostly street parking in the areas where I'm looking, I like to avoid those. I like a hassle-free environment for where my property is, and this also fits in with the strategy of buying properties that are going to be the most desirable in later years. Now, there is no guarantee on what the crime is going to look like in 5 years in a lot of these areas. But by at least trying to manage this particular element as much as you can, you're going to give yourself a good probability of buying something that's going to stay desirable in the future. Okay, so here we are. We can see we've got all of these properties. We can do the map view. We can do the list view. But one area I noticed that was close enough to Phoenix but had a low enough crime rate started right around here. So at that point, you can start zooming in. We know these are all going to be 3-bedroom, 2-bath homes. Try to get a little bit more detailed here. And sooner or later, we find, let's see here. It's showing us 200 out of 329. When I'm zooming in, I like to get to the point where I'm seeing that everything on the screen I'm seeing everything, right? And now I am. It's only showing me 82 properties. I'm seeing 284, 247, 249, 270. Let's see here. New 20 hours ago. Typically, brand spanking new listings that haven't been on the market for a while aren't your go-to. Of course, it's all going to depend on what the numbers say. But you usually want to find a seller who is at a point in the process of trying to sell where they get that they may not get their list price. Now, as we look around, all these green arrows are properties that have had their price dropped. That's something else to notice because that's an indicator that you are probably going to have a little bit more flexibility in what you can offer them in terms of getting a reduction in the price. Okay, let's see here. What looks good? I did pick one. Is this the one I picked? Yeah, let's go ahead and do this one. 247. So underneath the number I want, it's 3 beds, 2.5 baths, 1,700 square feet. That looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and heart it just so that when I log back into Realtor.com, I'm going to be able to see it. It's in what I consider to be an acceptable crime area. I'm usually willing to go about middle of the road in terms of crime. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Actually, I've already got this page open. So let's stay on the general search page for Realtor.com. Whoops. Okay. So we'll stay there. And we look at the detail page. We can see that it's 247,000. Some great tools here on Realtor.com for you to use. It was built in 1992. It's been on the market for 14 days. A quick scan of the photos will give you an idea of how new stuff is. Things look pretty new. I don't see anything that's very worrisome. Typical backyard for Phoenix. It helps if you've been to the areas before. Phoenix tends to not have a lot of lawns just because it's kind of out there in the middle of the desert. But this looks to be in fairly good shape. So we do a quick pass to get a feel for the property. And I'm not seeing anything that throws up any red flags. Great. Okay, so now once we have done this, we want to get a feel for what properties would rent for in that area. So to do that, I go to Trulia. Let's go ahead and zoom in on the exact area where this is. Let's see here. All right, so here's 247. This is the one we were just looking at. So we want to find the wedge of West Peoria, 75th, North 75th, and Grand. So let's go ahead and do the same thing here. These are all of the rentals. And we want to just get a feeling for what the rental market is there. Here's Grand, there's Peoria, there's 75th. So we're looking basically right here. I'm not seeing anything for rent. Let's look for anything that is 3 or more beds, anything that is a single family residential, because that's what we're looking at, and anything that has 2 or more baths. Okay. All right, so now we have got properties that are probably in the ballpark for us. This looks like a more dense neighborhood, so probably not something I'd consider comparable. But let's go ahead and look for things on this side of Grand that meet the bill here. So that's a 4-bed, 2-bath, 1,300 square feet, but no garage. I typically like to have a home with a garage. Let's see if we can't find something that's as comparable. There's something. So $1,535 a month. It's about the same square footage. So 1,500, 13, 1,600, and this has actually been increased. So let's go ahead now and start compiling some information. Let's go ahead and assume that we are going to be able to get this for 1,535, or we could do 1,500 just to be safe. I entered all these numbers before. Here's the current asking price. Now the list price is not what I want to pay, and here's why. One of the things that you're going to want to do once you've found the general area is go ahead and just do a search. Now, I do not know why Zillow hides this, but this is a great way to get an overall market estimate of what's going on in a certain area. You can do this by searching Zillow market summary and then the name of the city that you're looking in. So in this case, it was Peoria, Arizona. You can see up here that you can actually manually enter it if you just remember this particular URL. But when you're going and you're actually in the buy, rent pages for Zillow, there is no link to a page like this for the community you're looking in. So this is the easiest way to find it. And the data we want is the median list price and the median sales price, because we want to get a feeling for what's happening with the market. Now, despite the fact this is supposedly a very hot market and the forecast is forecasting growth of something like, what is it? Predicts 3.5% increase over the next year. Things have gone up 5.3% over the last year. Pretty good growth. We're still seeing homes staying on the market longer, seeing their prices reduced, and they're not selling for list price. So this represents a calculation we're going to want to know for figuring out the discount. So here is where I entered the list price in my spreadsheet. I entered the list price, and then I calculated what percentage of the list price folks are getting. And then I just use this, right? And this is going to automatically calculate a percent down from list price what I might offer. This would be paying 95%. This would be paying 90% of list price and so forth. And then what we want to do is populate these with what the mortgage would be. Now, I've already done this. A great tool for figuring out what the mortgage would be on a particular property is to, again, use Realtor.com. You can scroll down. You can simply enter the amounts that are listed here that we've got sort of figured out mathematically of what would make sense. So we could go with 234 as our number if you wanted to go that high. But what we want to do is figure out whether or not it balances out, whether or not it makes sense. This is what the mortgage cost would be given each one of these separate scenarios when I entered it in here and got it calculated that way. And this gives me the net cash flow, assuming this rental rate. So no matter which option you pick, you're actually doing all right. It depends on what your personal strategy is. Do you want it to be 10% or more, so you'll only consider 10% or more? Well, then maybe you want to go with this option, 234, 235. Now, keep in mind that that's 12,000 below asking price. That's not ridiculous, but it's also quite a bit above what is average for the city. Another thing you'll want to take into account, though, is use this as a guideline to simply inform you that, yes, you're able to get properties below list price. This is a calibration to what that number might be. But even since I ran numbers like this similarly in the same city, these numbers will tend to change fairly regularly, and they'll be less reliable over shorter periods of time simply because of the sample size is small, right? You're not seeing thousands of homes sold in this city every month for us to be able to get these numbers being spot on. But I think in this neighborhood is absolutely fine. The one number I thought I might just settle on would be an offer of 245. If I decided to give myself a maximum I'd be willing to pay, I'd still be making 8.4% on my investment. Now, how do we calculate return on investment? This is basically the total amount of money that's invested in the property, and you take the amount you make per month to multiply that by 12, so you get your total income over the course of a year, and you divide that by your total amount of money invested in the property, and that gives you a return on investment. It's like calculating the usefulness of the money. Let's say you had $50,000 and you could put it into a stock, and you were going to get on average 3 or 4% return on that every year. Well, that's fine, but if you could do this with that same amount of money and make 9%, 10%, 11%, that's a better utility of your money, right? That's money working harder for you. So in this particular case, we've got all the tools we need right in front of us. We haven't talked to a real estate agent. We haven't had to get involved with anybody we don't want to, but we've been able to get a feel for whether or not this would make sense for us as an investment property. If I were to write an offer on this property, I would probably put it right around here, probably low 230s, depending on how aggressive I wanted to be. New things that would have to happen before I actually write an offer on this property. One, I would reach out to a real estate agent in that area and get their feedback on the market in that area, find out what they have to say about it. They may have some insights. Next, I would want to physically get to see the home. I never suggest that anyone buy a home sight unseen. That just doesn't make sense. And then, of course, you're going to want to do the usual due diligence and do some inspections and find out what the state of the property is. You're going to want something that where you can plan out potential expenses down the road. Whenever you're looking at the cash flow per month, you want to take a certain percentage of that and put it aside for that new water heater or that air conditioning repair or whatever that might come along that you don't want to do, but you can plan for. And the way to plan for it, find out the age of those things in the home, find out the average useful life of those things, and literally amortize it out over a year and then divide it by 12, right? If it's something that typically lasts 10 years, then figure out what the cost of replacement is, divide that by 10, then divide that by 12, and you're going to get your monthly expense for that you're going to want to be putting aside. You'll also want to take into account anything else, like if you are going to rent the property, are you going to provide landscaping, someone to come and do landscaping? Here in this environment, I really don't think that's going to happen. What I'm seeing here tend to be mostly rocks and dirt, so I don't see anyone having to come out here and mow lawn, so it wouldn't be an expense you'd need to calculate. But it is something that you could add to this list of things that you're tracking if you were so inclined. Okay, so at this point, you're ready to take those next steps, and those would be, as we discussed, reaching out to a real estate professional in that area and getting yourself out there yourself. Now, the next thing to think about is what should start this process for me? If you're just a buyer, clearly it would be dictated by things important to you, where you work, where you want to live, those types of things. If you're an investor, it might just be communities you've always been interested in. It might just mean your local community, which obviously would work well. You'd already know a lot of the details that you'd need to find out from someone who lives there, like a real estate agent, to get more insights. The whole 2-bedroom, 1-bath desirability thing, right, might be something you know about because you live in the area. But again, these are all techniques that are designed to be useful for anybody and to help you pave the way. The other thing that you want to do here is not think of this as a thing you're only going to do if you're in a position to buy a property. Let's say you would love to begin investing. Well, one of the most important tools as an investor is to be comfortable with doing this. There is absolutely nothing wrong with you deciding, you know what, I'm going to schedule, and we're in January of 2020, so this is the time to make your goals and write them down and figure out how you're going to carry forward with your goals. Simply decide, I'm going to sit down for 1 hour every week, or 2 hours a week, or 1 hour every night, whatever you feel comfortable with, and I'm going to go through this process. I am going to look up these kinds of data. I am going to identify properties that I think make sense. I'm going to keep track of those properties, and then maybe you keep track of them through, you can oftentimes get data on what has sold. Some cities like Texas, for instance, not the state of Texas, does not make public what properties sell for, so it makes it more difficult for you. Real estate agents can do that for you, so it might be worth your while to partner up with a real estate agent so you can compile good data. But then judge yourself. Keep a tally sheet of properties you would have bought, how much you would have offered for them, how much you think it would have rented for, and then maybe sit down with a investors club in your area that you can find through Meetup or Facebook or wherever else, and just bounce it off of those folks to discover how accurate are you. Are you generating good numbers? And maybe after the fourth or fifth time you've done that and realized, if I had purchased that property, I'd be making $500 a month in positive cash flow on that thing. I really wish I'd done it. Your confidence will build and you'll be ready to do it. If you're a first-time buyer looking for your own home, you're going to be the most savvy buyer in that mix when it comes time for you to purchase your home. So these are all skills that are going to translate to anybody, whether you're an investor, buyer, or seller. These are all great things to know. All right, folks, I hope that has been useful. If you'd like to check out other things I have to share relating to real estate, you can continue to tune in here at YouTube where my podcast does get posted. If you'd like to consume the podcast in the normal way, whether it's on your phone or an iPod or however you want to listen to it, you can find it at therebelbroker.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio. It's everywhere. Looking forward to hearing from you if you have any questions, ideas, or suggestions. Thanks for taking your time with me. Good luck, and I hope you all reach your real estate goals.